Malcolm checked his watch the way men check weather, like the answer would excuse what they're about to do. A gleam of steel flashed at his wrist as he stood on the top step of the Chatham County Courthouse, shoulders squared, jaw relaxed, practicing a face that was supposed to look wounded. Not shattered, not guilty, just inconvenienced by grief he didn't actually feel. Beside him, Dr. Lorraine Price adjusted the strand of pearls at her throat with 2 fingers. She leaned in, whispered something into Malcolm's ear, and the corners of his mouth lifted in the smallest, ugliest way. A shared secret, a private joke, a toxic little trophy. They thought the judge was about to leave me with nothing. They thought I was still the same quiet wife who said, "Yes, ma'am," and "Of course," and "I'm sorry." So often, the words had worn grooves into my teeth. They thought I was the same woman who let Lorraine help with the budget, who nodded while Malcolm called my career a hobby. They didn't know I'd spent the last 18 months learning the language of their sins. I stood at the bottom of the courthouse steps and counted. 1, 2, 3, 4, 4 photographers, 2 with long lenses, 1 with a handheld rig and a mic, 1 with a flash already cocked, hungry. That was aggressive even for Lorraine. My stomach did a slow, sickening roll. The sensation you get when you miss a step in the dark and your body catches itself half a heartbeat too late. Savannah's humidity pressed on my skin like wet cotton. The air smelled like hot asphalt and magnolia. I gripped the handle of my purse until the leather bit into my palm. The purse was plain, unbranded, chosen on purpose. No logos, no evidence. Nothing Lorraine could later point at and call luxury spending. The cameras weren't there for Malcolm. They were there for me. They were there for the shot Lorraine had been curating for years. The charity case who married up, the stray she'd let into her son's life, walking out of court with a cardboard box and a ruined face. Lorraine wanted high-definition proof of shame. She wanted a headline to pass around. I forced my legs to move. Right foot, left foot. Keep your chin down. Don't look at the lenses. "Imani, darling." Lorraine's voice cut through the thick air like a serrated blade. Smooth, polished, sharpened. She stood near the security checkpoint, immaculate in a cream suit that probably cost more than my first car. Her hair was a sleek silver helmet, every strand in place. Her lipstick was the exact shade of restraint. She didn't look like a woman about to watch her son dissolve a marriage. She looked like she was hosting a garden party. Lorraine stepped forward and blocked my path to the metal detectors. I stopped. I had to stop. The old reflex to defer to her, to pause and wait for her permission to exist, was still hardwired into my muscles. "You look," she trailed off, letting her gaze rake over me, from hairline to sensible flats, like she was inspecting produce. Then she made a small sympathetic sound in her throat. "Oh, honey," she said. "You look so flushed. Are you handling the heat?" She reached into her Hermes bag and pulled out a packet of tissues. She held one out to me, pinched between manicured fingers as if I were contagious. "Here," she murmured. "For your forehead. You're glistening, dear. We wouldn't want the cameras to catch you looking frantic." I stared at the tissue. My brain screamed. I wanted to slap her hand away. I wanted to tell her I wasn't sweating because of the heat. I was sweating because my chest was wrapped in tape, and a cheap digital recorder was pressed against my sternum, warm as a secret. I was sweating because I'd listened to Malcolm confess in our kitchen, and I could still feel the sound of it in my bones. I was sweating because the weight of what I knew, what I could prove, felt heavy enough to bend my spine. If I took the tissue, I was admitting I was a mess. If I refused, I was rude. So I took it. "Thank you, Dr. Price," I said. My voice sounded thin, ready to break, exactly the way she liked it. I dabbed my forehead. It wasn't even damp. Lorraine's smile tightened just enough to show teeth, but not warmth. "Of course," she said. "We just want this to be dignified for everyone's sake." Dignified. Her favorite word. Lorraine used it the way other people used a leash. "Malcolm is already inside with Rhett," she added. "Try not to make a scene today. All right? Malcolm has a meeting at 3. A meeting at 3. Of course. Divorcing me was an item on his calendar, slotted between a project call and a round of golf. I'll do my best, I lied. I needed them to believe it. I needed them to think I was walking into that courtroom to beg for scraps. If Lorraine saw the rage under the performance, she might actually look at the folder tucked behind my wallet. And if she looked, she might understand. And if she understood, she would run. The photographers shifted, snapping angles. One of them called my name like we were friends. Imani! Over here! I kept my eyes down and stepped through the security line. The metal detector beeped for a man in boots ahead of me. The deputy waved him to the side. The sound of the wand was a low, intimate hum. My turn. I stepped forward. The recorder pressed into my skin like a bruise. I prayed it wouldn't trip the machine. It didn't. The green light blinked, and the deputy waved me through. I exhaled softly, the breath tasting like pennies. If you're watching this, I murmured, not turning my head, tell me where you're from or what time it is for you right now. Inside, the courthouse air was stale and overconditioned, like someone had tried to freeze the truth out of the room. The fluorescent lights made everything look slightly sick. And then the memory hit me so hard it almost knocked my knees loose. Lavender, expensive fabric, champagne fizz, a mirror bright enough to lie. I wasn't 30, standing in a courthouse. I was 24, standing on a pedestal in a bridal boutique, the kind of place that didn't keep price tags on the dresses, because the women who came there didn't need to pretend they cared. My reflection stared back at me, young, wide-eyed, trying to look grateful while fear trembled under my ribs. I had thought this was what lucky girls felt like. Chosen, elevated, safe. Turn, Lorraine commanded from a velvet armchair. I turned. The silk rustled. The dress was structured, heavy, high-necked, long-sleeved, beautiful in an architectural way. It felt like armor. It felt like a cage. It's a lot of fabric, I ventured softly. Do you have anything with a lower back? I asked the associate. Or maybe something lighter? Lorraine set down her champagne flute. The clink of crystal against glass was sharp enough to silence the room. Imani, she said, in that confidential, helpful tone she used right before she demolished your self-esteem. We have to be realistic about your silhouette. My hands went to my hips instinctively. You have a lovely, sturdy figure, Lorraine continued, smiling benevolently. But you don't have the frame for those wispy modern things. You need structure. You need something that holds you in. We don't want the guests whispering that you look uncontained. Uncontained. I looked at myself again. I saw a woman who ran in Forsyth Park. But under Lorraine's gaze, I felt wide and clumsy and wrong. Malcolm loves my shoulders, I tried. He said, Malcolm loves you, Lorraine interrupted, standing up. She walked to the pedestal and placed her hands on my shoulders, thumbs pressing into my collarbones. And because he loves you, she said, he wants you to look appropriate. Appropriate. Another leash word. He's marrying into a certain level of scrutiny, Imani. You're representing the family now. We can't have you looking like you're trying to seduce the groomsmen. She smoothed the heavy silk over my chest, effectively buttoning me up. This is elegant, Lorraine decided. It says wife, not girlfriend. Do you understand the difference? I was alone. If I argued, I was ungrateful. Lorraine was paying for the dress. Lorraine was paying for the wedding. Lorraine was paying for my transformation from a junior designer with a studio apartment into Mrs. Malcolm Price. I understand, I whispered. Good, Lorraine said, and patted my cheek as if I were a well-trained dog. Wrap it up, she said. We'll take this one. I stood there while they unzipped me, cold air spilling over my skin, and I wanted to say no. I wanted to grab my jeans, run out the door, and keep my life. But I did the math. The venue deposit was $20,000. The catering was $15,000. I had $312 in my checking account. I couldn't afford to have an opinion. So I let them dress me like a doll and told myself marriage was compromise. I didn't know yet that compromise was just a pretty word for submission. The memory faded as I walked down the courthouse hallway toward courtroom 3B. Outside the courtroom doors, Malcolm's attorney, Rhett Caldwell, was pacing with the relaxed impatience of a man who'd never been told no. He wore a suit that looked custom-made to intimidate. Malcolm stood beside him, scrolling on his phone, thumbs moving like my life was just another thread he could mute. Lorraine sat on a bench behind them, pearls gleaming. She looked up when she sensed me, and her eyes sharpened. There it was again. The evaluation, the verdict, the quiet belief that I would always fold. Not today. I took my seat at the opposite table. My lawyer, Denise Carter, didn't say much. She didn't need to. Denise had the calm of a woman who'd already read the ending. She tapped her pen once against her legal pad. A single, steady sound. Let them talk, that tap said. Let them build the story they want the judge to believe. Because today, we weren't walking into a simple divorce hearing. We were walking into a divorce court ambush evidence drop so clean it would look like fate. I stared at the closed courtroom door and kept my face neutral while my pulse tried to claw its way out of my throat. Somewhere in my purse, a photo was tucked into a folder, and a fair partner jewelry receipt from a boutique on Broughton Street, dated the week Malcolm told me he was at a client dinner. Somewhere in Denise's briefcase were printouts that mapped Lorraine's mother-in-law financial control into shell accounts. Somewhere in my phone were pictures of developer fraud foundation cracks on a project Malcolm swore was solid. On paper, I was the unstable one. Lorraine had been planting that story for years. Little comments at brunch, a concerned hand on my elbow, a sigh about my nerves. Malcolm played along because it was convenient. If I raised my voice, I was hysterical. If I went quiet, I was depressed. If I asked for answers, I was spiraling. They had a label ready for every normal human reaction, and labels are cheaper than accountability. That's why I'd taped the recorder to my body instead of leaving it on the table. I could feel it when I breathed, a hard little square against bone. Every step up those stairs, I wondered if the tape would peel in the heat and expose me before I even spoke out loud. If it slipped, they'd call it paranoia. If it held, it was proof. And pressed to my skin, recording everything I said, was the one-party consent recording they would never be able to unhear. The bailiff opened the door. "Parties for Price versus Price," he called. "You may enter." I rose. My legs felt like glass. My mouth tasted like metal. Lorraine's voice floated behind me, sweet as poison. "Try to be dignified, honey." I didn't look at her. I walked forward, into the room that was supposed to ruin me, and I kept my head down, not from shame, but from focus. Because if you're still here with me, don't go anywhere. In a few minutes, you're going to hear Malcolm Price admit, in his own voice, what he thought he could bury. And when you do, I want you to tell me, what time is it where you are, and where are you listening from? Drop it in the comments. Give this video a like if you want the story to keep going. The part that breaks them is next. The courtroom door closed behind us with a soft final click, and for one blink, I let myself pretend it was the sound of a lock turning on the past. Denise slid into the chair beside me, calm and unreadable. Across the aisle, Malcolm leaned back like he owned the air, and Lorraine sat with her pearls centered perfectly. I kept my eyes on the judge's bench and let the courthouse smell, floor wax and stale coffee, pull me backward the way stress always does. Because the truth is, I didn't become Mrs. Malcolm Price in one romantic sweep. I became her in inches, in little concessions that felt harmless until they added up to a cage. The first inch was the dress. Savannah Bridal on Whitaker Street was all pale wood and soft lighting. The associate had called me sweetheart and offered sparkling water, as if hydration could smooth out fear. Lorraine didn't sit on the couch like a regular mother of the groom. She took the velvet armchair like a throne. She watched me the way she watched stock tickers, measuring, judging, deciding. "Turn," she said again, and I turned again, dizzy from the heavy silk and the pressure of her gaze. "You see," she told the associate. "Structure suits her." I tried to laugh it off. "I run," I said, like that fact could defend me. "I do yoga." Lorraine's smile never moved. Fitness is lovely, she said, but taste is responsibility. We are not making a statement, Imani. We are making an impression. That was her philosophy. Not what you are, what people think you are. When I asked for something lighter, something with a lower back, Lorraine's eyes softened the way they did when she was about to hurt you gently. Honey, she whispered, we have to be realistic about your silhouette. Silhouette, as if I was a problem in lighting, as if my body was something that needed to be managed so it wouldn't embarrass the family. She smoothed fabric over my ribs and called it elegance. She called the high neck class. She called my discomfort gratitude. And I swallowed it because she paid for it. I swallowed it because Malcolm stood behind her, watching me in the mirror like he was appraising a purchase. He kissed my cheek and said, Mom just wants you to shine. And I wanted to believe him. I wanted to believe that love was a bridge between my life and theirs. The second inch was the money. 6 months into the marriage, I thought I'd found a pocket of air. I sat at our dining table with my laptop open, sketching a logo for a small bakery near the river. It was freelance, quiet work, the kind that let me remember who I was. Elena, the owner, had emailed me, $2,000 for the full branding package. $2,000 wasn't a fortune, but it was a key. It was rent money. It was groceries. It was proof I didn't have to ask permission to exist. The front door opened. Malcolm's briefcase hit the foyer tile with a thud. Smells good, he said, kissing the top of my head, scotch and expensive cologne clinging to him like a second suit. His eyes flicked to my screen. Shopping? I landed a client, I said, too proud to hide. That bakery on River Street. They want me to do their logo and menus. They're paying me $2,000. He poured himself a drink and chuckled. Not cruel, not loud, just dismissive. The laugh you give a toddler who shows you a drawing that looks like a potato. Babe, he said, sitting beside me, taking my hand. That's cute, but I made that in interest while I was driving home. It's not about the money, I said. I'm bored. I want to work. You do work, he answered, soothing as a sedative. You run the house. You keep Mom off my back. That's a full-time job. Then he leaned in, voice lowered like we were sharing intimacy instead of control. Investors watch everything. If my wife is hustling for scraps from a bakery, it makes me look like I can't provide. It looks desperate. Desperate. That word was a slap dressed up as concern. He didn't tell me not to take the job because he hated my talent. He told me not to take it because he hated what talent meant. Independence. A paycheck with my name on it. A door I could walk through. Just tell them you're too busy, he said, already walking away. Focus on the house. Mom mentioned the guest room curtains look faded. I stared at my laptop until the screen dimmed. Then I typed Elena an email and erased it 3 times before I hit send. My schedule has unexpectedly filled up. I'm so sorry. That night, I made Malcolm a sandwich and smiled while something inside me went quiet. The third inch was my body. A year later, I fainted in the foyer while arranging flowers because Lorraine said roses were cliché. I woke up on the sofa with smelling salts burning my sinuses, and Lorraine hovering like a doctor and a judge combined. Malcolm stood by the fireplace, phone in hand, annoyance leaking through his concern. She's awake, Lorraine announced, as if I was a machine that had restarted. You fainted, dear, she told me, voice syrupy. Just dropped like a stone. I've been telling Malcolm you look peaked. And then she did what she always did. She turned a moment into a label. This is exactly what I've worried about with the children question, she whispered theatrically, as if my uterus belonged to the family board. My blood went cold. I just stood up too fast, I tried. Because you were anxious, Lorraine corrected. You're so high-strung, it takes a toll on the system. Malcolm shrugged, casual as betrayal. Mom's probably right. You've been overwhelmed. Overwhelmed. Fragile. Not well. The words stacked around me like bricks. Lorraine offered iron supplements, maybe a sedative, maybe stability. Mother-in-law financial control wasn't just money. It was narrative. It was deciding who I was until I forgot I could argue. I learned to cry silently. I learned to keep my voice soft. I learned that anger, unlike fainting, was punishable. By year 3, the house felt too quiet. Malcolm's phone sat face up on the nightstand, charging, careless in a way that made my skin prickle. I wasn't looking for anything. I'd trained myself not to look. Investigating your husband felt like betrayal when you still believed vows were magic. Then the screen lit up. Kayla. Not a business contact, not a contractor. Just Kayla. Missing you. Last night was incredible. When can you get away again? The world didn't spin. It stopped. My heart didn't race. It gave one hard, painful thud and then seemed to pause, like my body needed a second to accept what my mind already knew. Last night, Malcolm had told me he was at a zoning dinner. He'd come home at midnight smelling like mince and lies. I'd warmed leftovers. I'd rubbed his shoulders. I'd listened. The bathroom water turned off. His voice called, "Can you grab me a towel?" "Coming," I said. And the scariest part was how normal I sounded. I handed him the towel through the cracked door, watched his hand take it, watched my life continue as if nothing had happened. But something had. That text was the first crack in the foundation. Later, I would photograph developer fraud foundation cracks in one of Malcolm's projects and feel the same cold certainty. A structure can look perfect until the moment it fails. I didn't confront him that night. I didn't scream. I sat on the edge of the bed and repeated the message in my head until it branded itself into memory. If he was cheating, he was hiding. And men who hide never hide only one thing. That was the moment the marriage became an investigation. I didn't have divorce papers yet. I didn't have Denise. I didn't have a one-party consent recording pressed to my skin like armor. I didn't have a folder labeled with proof and an affair partner jewelry receipt tucked inside. I had only a sentence glowing on a screen, and the sudden understanding that if I stayed the woman they'd trained me to be, I would disappear. And I learned to move like a shadow. So I started watching. I started listening. I started counting. 1, 2, 3, 4. Not cameras back then, lies. And I promised myself I would learn every single one. The morning after I saw Kayla's name on Malcolm's phone, I woke up before dawn and lay still, listening to the house breathe. The air conditioner clicked on and off like a nervous habit. Somewhere in the kitchen, the ice maker dropped cubes with a sharp, lonely clatter. Malcolm's breathing beside me was slow and confident, the sleep of a man whose conscience never kept him up. I stared at the ceiling and decided what kind of woman I had to become. Not the kind who cried and asked why, the kind who waited and learned. I slid out of bed, padded into the bathroom, and turned on the faucet just enough to make noise. If you create steady sound, you can think in peace. I leaned on the sink and watched my face in the mirror. I looked normal, a little pale, eyes slightly puffy. Nothing about me screamed that my husband was lying to my face and laughing at me behind my back. And that, I realized, was the most dangerous part. By 7, Malcolm was dressed in a crisp shirt and slacks, humming as he poured coffee. He kissed my cheek like a man signing a receipt. "Big day," he said. "Walk through on the riverfront renovation." "Sounds exciting," I answered. He checked his phone, thumb flicking, the screen lighting his pupils for a split second. I didn't need to see the message. The habit was the message. "Mom's coming by later," he added casually. "She wants to show you some nursery ideas." My stomach tightened. We'd never officially agreed to try for a baby. We'd only allowed Lorraine to talk like it was scheduled, like everything else. "I have errands," I said lightly. Malcolm didn't look up. "You always have errands." I smiled. "I like being useful." He chuckled, pleased with himself, and left. The Mercedes backed out. The sound faded down our street. And I was alone with the truth. I didn't start with spying. I started with survival. Because if Malcolm was cheating, he had leverage I didn't. Money, lawyers, connections. Lorraine's network of women who ran charities like intelligence agencies. If I confronted him with nothing but a feeling, he would look at me with those calm eyes and say, "You're imagining things," and Lorraine would nod and offer me a tissue. And then I would become the story. Not him, me. So I needed something that couldn't be smoothed over with charm. I needed proof that could survive their smiles. The first place I went was my closet. On the top shelf, in pristine dust bags, sat Lorraine's gifts, designer purses for every birthday and Christmas. She never asked what I liked. She bought what she thought a price wife should carry: stiff leather, loud logos, the kind of bag that announces money. I'd never used them. Lorraine liked giving me gifts I couldn't enjoy. It reminded me that even my luxuries weren't mine. I pulled down 3 and set them on the bed: a beige tote, a structured black shoulder bag, a glittering clutch that looked like it belonged to a stage performer. I stared at them and felt something harden in me. If Malcolm was using marital money to decorate his affair, then my silence was funding my own humiliation. And if I wanted to investigate, I needed cash. Money that didn't leave a digital trail Lorraine could sniff out. That afternoon, I drove my old sedan across town to a pawn shop tucked behind a fried chicken place. The sign in the window said "Cash for Gold" in sun-faded letters. The parking lot smelled like grease and exhaust. Inside, the air was stale cigarettes and floor cleaner. A thick-necked man behind the counter looked up and let his eyes scan me from head to toe, lingering on my wedding ring like he could price it. "Help you?" he grunted. I placed the bags on the glass counter. "I want to sell these," I said. He opened each one, checking lining and seams. He was looking for fakes, but it felt like he was looking for weakness. "I can give you 400 for the lot," he said without looking up. 400? The number came out strangled. "The black one. I ain't retail," he cut in. 400. Take it or leave it." I thought about Lorraine's smug smile when she handed me those dust bags. "This will elevate you, honey." I thought about Malcolm chuckling when I said I wanted to work. I thought about Kayla's message glowing on his screen like a dare. "Cash," I said. "I want cash." He counted out 20s and slid them across the counter. I took them and didn't count them back. I shoved the money into my purse and walked out, feeling lighter. I had just sold Lorraine's expectations for 20 cents on the dollar, and it was the best deal I'd ever made. That night, Malcolm came home late and kissed my forehead like nothing was wrong. I served dinner. I smiled. I asked about his day. He talked about zoning issues and permits, words he knew I didn't understand. He liked talking over my head. It made him feel taller. I nodded and listened, but inside my mind was already moving. Because the next step wasn't to catch him with Kayla. The next step was to understand what else he was hiding. The next morning, I went to the public library. I didn't use my library card. My library card was linked to our home address. Anything linked to our home could be linked to Lorraine. Lorraine had friends everywhere, and I'd learned the hard way that privacy was a luxury. So I walked in like a stranger and paid $5 for a guest pass. The library on Bull Street was drab brick and flickering fluorescent lights. The carpet smelled like wet wool. The computers were old, the kind that hummed like they were thinking too hard. I chose a terminal in the back corner, away from the windows. At first, I searched like a wounded wife. Signs of infidelity. Phone number reverse lookup. What does it mean if... Then I stopped. Infidelity would break my heart, but it wouldn't save me in court. If Malcolm was preparing to leave, he would not leave empty-handed. He would leave with everything, and he would leave me holding the mess. So I forced myself into the colder questions. How do spouses hide money? How to find undisclosed accounts in divorce? What is dissipation of marital assets? And then, because Malcolm lived and breathed real estate, I searched what he would never expect me to search. Shell Companies Real Estate Development, LLC, Georgia. A maze opened. Corporate filings, county records, Secretary of State databases, press releases, permit applications. Most of it was public, hiding in plain sight behind jargon and the assumption that wives don't read. I typed Malcolm's name, A list appeared. Price Development Group, Riverfront Renewal LLC, Azalea Holdings, Palmetto Consulting, Camberline Solutions. More names, more LLCs than I'd ever heard Malcolm mention. Some formed and dissolved within months, like mayflies. Others overlapped, linked by the same registered agent, the same P.O. box, the same pattern of paper that looked clean until you traced it long enough. My palms went damp. This wasn't just a man with a side piece. This was a man with a machine. I bought a cheap notebook at a gas station, no loyalty card, no digital receipt, and started writing down names, dates, addresses, registration numbers. I wrote like a student cramming for a test. Because in a way I was. The test was my future. Soon I had routines that looked harmless. On Tuesdays, I went to yoga, which meant the library. On Thursdays, I shopped for curtains, which meant the county clerk. Every time Lorraine asked where I'd been, I answered with something domestic, something boring, something that made her eyes glaze over. Lorraine hated boredom. She didn't suspect it. Around that time, Malcolm grew careless with his phone in a way that felt like arrogance. He didn't leave it unattended for long, never long enough to scroll through messages, but he stopped treating it like a weapon. He would set it face up on the kitchen counter while he washed his hands. He would toss it onto the couch cushion while he took a call in the backyard. He assumed I wasn't curious. He assumed curiosity required confidence. One morning, he kissed me goodbye and left his iPad on the dresser, still open to his email. For a full minute, I stood there staring at the screen, my hands hovering like I was about to touch fire. Then I did something that shocked me. I sat down. His inbox was a river of deals, subject lines full of urgent and closing and revised. I didn't open anything. I didn't need to. I just looked for patterns, bank names, contractor names, anything that matched my list. And then I saw it. A password reset email from our cell provider. My heart stumbled. Malcolm handled the account, of course. Lorraine had insisted on it early in the marriage. A household needs one point of authority, she'd said, smiling, like she was teaching manners instead of building a prison. Malcolm had nodded and called it efficiency. But the reset email meant the account was accessible through his primary email. And he'd left it open. I didn't have time to guess his password. Guessing is loud. Guessing leaves footprints. So I did what I'd been trained to do my whole marriage. I performed. I picked up the landline and dialed the provider's customer service number, hands shaking so hard I misdialed twice. When a bored voice answered, I pitched my voice high and soft, letting it wobble like fear. "Hi," I said. "I'm trying to pay the bill for my husband and I can't get into the account. He's going to be so upset. He's in meetings all day and I just want to be a good wife." The rep asked for verification. I pretended not to know it. I let a little breathy panic slip in. I didn't need to lie about being scared. I'd lived scared for years. I just had to aim it. There was a pause, keys clacking. "All right," he sighed at last. "Since you're calling from the home number on file, I can send a reset link to the primary email. You'll need to use it within 10 minutes. "Thank you," I whispered, like he'd handed me a life raft. I hung up and clicked the reset link. I changed the password to something Malcolm might use, something that wouldn't feel suspicious if he noticed later. Then I logged in and went straight to usage details. Rows of numbers appeared. Calls, texts, timestamps. And there it was. One number again and again, late at night, early in the morning, during dinner, while I slept beside him. I copied it into my notebook like it was a spell. I didn't have a name yet, but I had a thread. 2 days later, I took $5 from my pawn cash and bought a prepaid Visa at a gas station. I drove to the library, chose the same humming terminal, and paid $10 to a sketchy reverse lookup site. The loading circle spun so long my skin prickled. I kept glancing over my shoulder, convinced everyone could see my guilt. The result finally popped up. Kayla Monroe. An address on the south side of town. Age 26. The name from the text was real. I stared at it until my eyes burned. A part of me wanted to drive there immediately, to see her door, her street, her life. Another part of me, the part that was learning, stayed still. Because the question wasn't, who is she? The question was, what is he doing, and how far will he go to protect it? That afternoon, I searched something else. Does adultery matter in Georgia divorce? The answer was complicated, full of legal language and loopholes. Yes, sometimes for alimony. No, not if the judge thinks the finances are clean. And if you have a prenup, if you sign away your leverage, cheating can become a sad footnote instead of a weapon. We did have a prenup. Lorraine had presented it to me like a gift on our engagement. We're not doing this because we don't trust you, honey. We're doing this because the world is messy. It protects everyone. I'd signed it at a conference table with a pen that felt too heavy, with Malcolm's hand resting possessively on my shoulder. I remembered Lorraine's smile as the lawyer said words like waiver and separate property. I remembered thinking, this is grown up. This is responsible. Now I understood it was simply strategy. The prenup meant Malcolm could cheat and still leave with his empire intact. Unless I proved something bigger than cheating. Unless I proved fraud. That was the day the investigation stopped being emotional and became mathematical. Still, math doesn't help if you can't follow the numbers in the real world. So I tried. On a Thursday, Malcolm told me he had a late site visit. He put on the suit he wore when he wanted to impress investors, checked his hair in the mirror 3 times, and kissed me with a distracted mouth. "Don't wait up," he said. "Long night?" I nodded like a faithful wife and watched his taillights disappear. Then I grabbed my keys and followed. Not close, never close. 2 cars between us, like I'd seen in old movies. My heart hammered against my ribs so hard it felt like a second engine. Every red light felt like exposure. Malcolm's Mercedes slid through downtown, past the river, then toward the newer side of the city, where the restaurants were dim and expensive. He turned into a parking garage. I slowed, palms sweating on the wheel. And then my sedan shuddered. A loud metallic thunk, followed by a violent pull to the right. "No," I whispered, gripping the wheel. "Not now." The steering jerked in my hands. I fought it onto the shoulder, hazard lights clicking like laughter. When I stepped out, the air was damp and cold. Rain started in a miserable drizzle. I looked at the front tire, and my stomach dropped. Shredded. Not flat. Destroyed. Cars hissed past, gusts of wind slapping my wet blouse against my skin. My phone buzzed with a notification from Lorraine. Something about thread count. But I couldn't even see the screen. All I could see were Malcolm's taillights vanishing, carrying him toward Kayla, while I stood in the dark, alone. A part of me wanted to sit in the mud and cry until someone saved me, but no one was coming to save me. If I called roadside assistance, it would alert Malcolm's account. If I called Malcolm, he'd ask why I was on the highway. Lorraine would say it proved I couldn't handle machinery. The story would become Amani is incompetent again. So I opened the trunk. The jack and tire iron were heavy and unfamiliar. I had never changed a tire in my life. Malcolm always called someone. Malcolm always made sure I didn't learn the things that create independence. The lug nuts were rusted tight. I put the tire iron on the first one and pulled. It didn't move. I pulled harder, metal digging into my palms. Nothing. I thought about Malcolm laughing at my $2,000 client like it was pocket change. I thought about Lorraine's tissue held out like a leash. I thought about Kayla's name on his screen, casual as a heartbeat. I stepped onto the tire iron with my heel. It slipped. I scraped my shin against the bumper and hissed in pain. "Damn it!" I breathed. I tried again, using my whole weight. The nut gave a screech of protest and turned. For 45 minutes, I wrestled with the jack in the rain, hands shaking, hair sticking to my cheeks, grease staining my fingers. I broke a nail. I ripped the skin on my knuckle. By the time the spare was on, I looked feral. But it was on. I sat in the driver's seat afterward, shivering so hard I could barely fit the key into the ignition, and something shifted inside me. I had lost Malcolm that night, but I had found something else, proof that I could survive without him. Weeks passed. My notebook filled. Malcolm's life became a grid. Meetings, site visits, client dinners, long showers when he'd come home smelling like soap and someone else's perfume. I watched his patterns. I watched my own. Then I heard the first admission. It was a Tuesday. Taco Tuesday, technically, though Malcolm hated tacos because they were messy. We ate salmon. Lorraine had been over earlier, criticizing the arrangement of the living room chairs like she was staging a photo shoot for my failure. After dinner, Malcolm went into his office and shut the door. "I've got a call with Jerome," he said. "Don't disturb me." Jerome. The name hit my ears like a coin dropped into water. Jerome Waller had been Malcolm's partner years ago, an early partner, back when the company was smaller, back when Malcolm still pretended he believed in community. Jerome was the man Malcolm blamed for every ugly rumor. Jerome was the man Lorraine called that unfortunate situation, as if he'd died. Now Malcolm was calling him. I went upstairs, turned off the bedroom light, and sat on the floor. Our house had a vent that connected the master suite to the office, one of Malcolm's renovation shortcuts. He'd spent a fortune soundproofing the media room. He hadn't bothered insulating the wall he thought no one would ever listen through. I pressed my ear to the vent. At first it was just muffled sound, Malcolm's deep voice rolling like thunder. Then I shifted and the words sharpened. "Don't give me that numbers crap, Jerome," Malcolm snapped. "Riverfront closes on the 1st. If we delay for foundation work, the buyers walk." A pause. Jerome's voice was faint, a low murmur of caution. Malcolm exhaled, irritated. "Then adjust the report. Delete the part about the water table. Say the bedrock is stable." My throat tightened. I clamped a hand over my mouth. "No one is going to check," Malcolm continued. "The city inspector is friendly. I took care of him last week." He laughed, short and hard. "We form the LLC, we sell the building, we dissolve the company. By the time the basement floods, we're ghosts. That's how we get rich." I sat in the dark with my heart pounding so hard I thought the vent might rattle. By the time the basement floods. That meant he knew it would flood. He knew the building was dangerous. He didn't care. In that moment, Kayla became almost irrelevant. Cheating was personal, what I'd just heard was industrial. And if Malcolm could sell a dangerous building to strangers, what was stopping him from selling my life down the river, too? I waited until Malcolm's snoring started, steady, arrogant, and then I went to the kitchen table with my laptop. I needed to document what I'd heard in a way that could be used. I created a folder on the desktop and named it Garden Plans. Malcolm hated gardening. He called it playing in the dirt. He wouldn't click a folder about hydrangeas and mulch. Inside, I created a document and typed the date. I typed what Malcolm said as close to word for word as my memory allowed. I quoted him. I wrote Jerome's name. I wrote Riverfront Renewal. I wrote Adjust Report, Water Table, Inspector is Friendly, We're Ghosts. Then I password protected the file. The password wasn't an anniversary. Malcolm didn't remember those. It was the name of my childhood dog, Buster. I saved the document and stared at it until a strange calm settled over me. The panic didn't vanish. It just moved into the background, like a refrigerator hum. In the foreground was clarity. I was no longer just a wife. I was a witness. The problem was that notes weren't enough. A husband can say your notes are imaginations. A mother-in-law can say you're spiraling. A courtroom can shrug at a woman's memory and call it emotional. I needed paper that wasn't mine. So I went looking for Jerome. Finding him wasn't as easy as typing his name into a search bar. Malcolm had scrubbed him from the company website years ago, erasing him so thoroughly it was like the man had never existed. But public records have long memories if you know where to dig. In an old permit application, I found an address for a warehouse office Jerome once used. I drove there on a Saturday and parked 3 blocks away, heart hammering every time a dark SUV passed. The building was a converted warehouse in the industrial district, brick crumbling, graffiti-like bruises. A buzzer hung by the door with masking tape that read, Waller. I stood there for a long moment, rain beginning to mist, and wondered if I'd lost my mind. Then I pressed the buzzer. Nothing. I pressed again, holding it down. A voice crackled through the speaker, distorted and angry. What? Jerome Waller? I asked, voice trembling. My name is Amani. I'm Malcolm Price's wife. Silence. Then the speaker clicked off. He wasn't buzzing me in. He was ignoring me. I didn't leave. I sat on the damp concrete steps, hugging my knees as the mist thickened into rain. My phone buzzed. A text from Lorraine. Did you find the Egyptian cotton? Make sure the thread count is over 600. I didn't answer. 2 hours passed. Finally, the metal door creaked open. A man stepped out holding a trash bag and a cigarette. He looked older than the photos I'd found buried in old news articles. His hair was gray and thinning. His face was lined with the kind of grooves that come from years of grinding your teeth. He stopped when he saw me. You're still here, he said flatly. I need to talk to you, I said, standing. My legs were stiff. I got nothing to say to a Price, he spat, tossing the trash into the dumpster. Go back to your mansion. Go spend your husband's dirty money. It's not dirty money, I blurted, then corrected myself because honesty mattered now. It's fraud money, and I want to prove it. Jerome's eyes narrowed. You're wearing a coat that costs more than my rent, he observed, and you want me to believe you suddenly grew a conscience? I didn't grow a conscience, I said, the words coming faster. I grew a spine. I heard him. I heard Malcolm talking about Riverfront, about the soil reports, about dissolving LLCs, about being ghosts. Jerome laughed, dry and bitter. Riverfront? He shook his head. He's pulling that scam again. The man is a creature of habit. Please, I said, stepping closer. I know he pushed you out. I know he stole your share. If you help me, I can take him down. I can get you justice. Jerome flicked ash into a puddle. It hissed. I don't want justice, he said. I want peace. Malcolm destroys everything he touches. If I help you, he'll come for me again. He turned toward the door. He's cheating on me, I shouted. The words sounded pathetic even as they left my mouth, but desperation makes you reach for whatever works. Jerome paused with his hand on the handle. He didn't turn around, but he didn't go inside either. Wait here, he grumbled. 5 minutes later, he came back carrying a cardboard box taped shut with old duct tape. The box sagged, damp at the edges, smelling faintly of mildew and toner. He shoved it into my arms. It was heavier than it looked. I saved this, he said, voice low. I don't know why. Maybe I thought the feds would come knocking and I could trade it for immunity. Nobody ever came. What is it? I asked, fingers tightening. The early days, Jerome said. Emails he thought he deleted. Original invoices from consultants who were really city officials taking bribes. Paperwork on how he builds the shells. It shows the pattern. My chest went tight. Jerome, thank you. Don't thank me, he snapped. That box is a grenade. If he finds it in your house, he won't just divorce you. He'll ruin you. He'll make sure your own people don't recognize you. He looked at me with something like pity. You're swimming with a shark, lady. And you're bleeding. I drove home with the box in my trunk, covered by an old blanket. Every bump in the road made me imagine the tape splitting, the evidence spilling out like guts. When I got home, Malcolm wasn't there, thank God. I carried the box into the basement storage room where the holiday decorations lived. Malcolm hated holidays. He never went down there. I opened a bin labeled Halloween and lifted out plastic skeletons and fake spiderwebs. I placed Jerome's box at the bottom and piled the decorations back on top. It felt fitting. The skeletons in Malcolm's closet were literally hiding under plastic skeletons. Lorraine tightened her grip a few days after I hid Jerome's box, as if she could sense I was moving without her permission. She didn't call first. She never did when she wanted power. She simply arrived and announced a plan like it had already been approved by a board. Clear your afternoon, she chirped over the phone. I'm taking you to lunch, just the girls. Saying no to Lorraine was like saying no to a hurricane. The storm would happen anyway, you'd just get blamed for the damage. She picked me up in her luxury sedan. The car smelled like leather and expensive air freshener. She drove past our usual restaurants and kept going north until the streets turned sterile and quiet, lined with medical offices and manicured hedges. "Where are we going?" I asked, gripping my purse. "A surprise," she said, smiling. She pulled into a parking lot and stopped in front of a building with gleaming glass letters. Advanced Fertility Solutions. My stomach dropped. "Lorraine?" I whispered. "I didn't—" "Hush!" she cut in, already unbuckling her seatbelt. "Malcolm mentioned you've been feeling unfulfilled. And let's be honest, Imani, you're 30. The clock is ticking. Malcolm needs a legacy. He works too hard to leave his empire to a distant cousin." I sat frozen, heat rushing to my face. This wasn't lunch. This was an inspection. They wanted to check the livestock. Inside, the waiting room was plush and silent, full of women staring at their hands. Lorraine marched to the desk like she owned the clinic. "Mrs. Price and Mrs. Price," she announced brightly. "We have an appointment." I grabbed her arm, lowering my voice. "I didn't agree to this. I'm not ready." Lorraine turned on me, and for a second the mask slipped. Her eyes went flat and cold. "It's not about what you're ready for," she hissed. "It's about what is required. You have one job in this family. You don't work. You don't bring in money. You don't have connections. So you provide the heir. Otherwise, what exactly is the point of you?" The words hung there, brutal and precise. My first impulse was to scream that I was building a case that would bury her son. My second impulse was smarter. I forced tears into my eyes and let my voice break the way Lorraine liked. "I'm scared it won't work," I whispered. "And then you'll be disappointed." Lorraine softened instantly. Weakness made her feel powerful. "Oh, honey," she cooed, patting my cheek. "That's why we're here. We'll get you checked. Maybe hormones. Maybe a little help. You'll be a mother by Christmas." I went through the appointment with my soul tucked behind my ribs. I let the doctor ask humiliating questions, while Lorraine sat in the corner, nodding as if my body was a contract she was reviewing. I smiled when I was told I was fine, and I pretended relief. But walking back to the car, I felt hollowed out. Mother-in-law financial control was one kind of cage. Mother-in-law bodily control was another. Lorraine wanted to own my time, my money, my future. And now, my bloodline. I stared out the passenger window as she drove, watching Spanish moss sway on the oaks like hanging secrets. And I made myself a promise so quiet it felt like prayer. I wasn't going to give them a baby. I was going to give them a subpoena. Over the next week, I pulled a few documents from the box at a time, late at night, using a small flashlight at the kitchen table. Invoices, bank transfers, printouts of emails with subject lines like zoning expedite and consulting fee. Names I recognized from Lorraine's charity circles. Amounts that made my stomach drop. I didn't understand it all. I was a designer. I understood color and balance and negative space. I didn't understand money laundering. So I taught myself. Back at the library, I watched hours of videos on forensic accounting. I learned what layering meant. I learned what kiting meant. I learned how shell companies hide liability, the way curtains hide windows. And in that learning, something else happened. My fear changed shape. It became organized. It became useful. The affair still hurt, but it stopped being the center of my pain. Kayla was a symptom. The disease was Malcolm's belief that everything, money, buildings, women, was just material he could shape. Then Malcolm made a mistake that showed me he was preparing to run. On a Friday night, he insisted we go to a French restaurant near City Market, the kind of place with candlelight and white tablecloths. He was in a good mood, the way he got after closing something big. "Order the lobster," he said, sipping wine. "Celebrate with me." I ordered soup. I couldn't eat. My stomach was a knot. When the check came, Malcolm tossed his platinum card onto the tray without looking. He was busy on his phone, probably texting Kayla. The waiter returned a minute later, uncomfortable. "Sir," he said softly, "I'm afraid the card was declined." Malcolm's head snapped up. Excuse me? The machine rejected it, the waiter repeated. Do you have another form of payment? That's impossible, Malcolm hissed. That card has a high limit. Try again. I did, the waiter said. Twice. Malcolm snatched the card back. His calm cracked for a second, showing a flash of panic. He pulled out a corporate card and shoved it toward the waiter. While he argued, his phone sat on the table, unlocked. He'd opened a banking app. I didn't move my head. I moved only my eyes. Checking. $400. $400. For a man who bragged about cash flow, it was a slap of unreality. Then I saw the transaction list. Transfer to K. Monroe, $5,000. Transfer to Aaliyah Holdings, $20,000. Transfer to offshore account, $50,000. He was draining accounts, moving everything, liquidating. It wasn't a glitch. It was a getaway plan. The waiter returned, and the corporate card went through. Malcolm forced a laugh, told the waiter the system must be temperamental. He slid his phone into his pocket like he was tucking away a weapon. Everything okay? I asked softly, feigning innocence. Bank error, he muttered. Stupid glitch. I nodded, playing the role he wanted, but inside, the clock started ticking louder. If Malcolm was moving money, he was preparing for the divorce. And if he was preparing for the divorce, he was preparing to bury me under debt with my forged signature. I went home and pulled the bracelet receipt photo back up on my phone. The boutique name glowed on the screen like a dare. That affair partner jewelry receipt wasn't just a symbol of cheating. It was proof of financial behavior, behavior that Denise could use to show dissipation, deception, intent. But Denise had warned me, circumstantial isn't enough. We need him to admit it. We need him to say out loud that he signed your name. So I bought the recorder. I taped it to my body some days just to feel its weight. It became my private pulse, a hard square of plastic reminding me I wasn't helpless anymore. I tried again to plant it under his desk, failed. After that near miss, I changed tactics. I stopped trying to catch Malcolm accidentally. I started building a moment where he would confess on purpose. I practiced questions while folding laundry. I practiced a tremble in my voice while making coffee. I practiced looking defeated in the mirror, because defeat made Malcolm reckless. Lorraine noticed the change and leaned into it. She called more. She stopped by unannounced. She inspected my face the way she inspected furniture. One afternoon, she arrived with muffins and a smile that didn't reach her eyes. You're jumpy, she said, setting the basket on the table. Guilty conscience? I laughed weakly. Just tired. Lorraine's gaze drifted to my closed laptop. Working on something? Recipes, I lied. She smiled like she'd caught me. Good. A home needs a woman who knows her place. It took everything in me not to flinch, because my place, I realized, was wherever the truth was. That evening, I went down to the basement, opened the Halloween bin, and touched the box like it was a sleeping animal. Jerome's warning echoed in my ears. Grenade. I closed the lid and walked back upstairs, mind racing. If Malcolm found that box, he'd destroy me. Which meant the timing had to be perfect. The hearing date was set. Discovery deadlines loomed. Malcolm's lawyer would posture. Lorraine would smirk. They would try to turn the court into theater. And when they did, Denise and I would answer with something else. A divorce court ambush evidence dropped so heavy, it would knock their smiles off. But to make it happen, I still needed the one thing Malcolm could not explain away. His own voice, admitting he forged my name, admitting he treated my identity like a tool. So I kept my fear polished and visible, like bait. I let Malcolm believe I was cornered. I let Lorraine believe I was collapsing, because the night before the hearing was coming. And that night, I planned to make Malcolm Price talk. Malcolm cornered me in the kitchen the night before the hearing. Like the house itself had warned him something was shifting. The overhead lights were too bright, turning the granite island into a stage. I was rinsing his wine glass. The water ran warm over my fingers, and I kept my shoulders loose the way you do when you're trying not to look like prey. Under my blouse, pressed flat to my sternum, the recorder dug into my skin. The duct tape pulled every time I breathed. I could feel my heartbeat thudding against it. Malcolm slammed a folder onto the counter. The sound made me jump. The glass slipped from my soapy hand and shattered in the sink with a sharp, splintering crack. "Leave it," he said, watching me reach for a shard. His voice was clipped, managerial. "We need to talk." I turned off the faucet slowly. I wiped my hands on a towel. "What is this?" I asked, nodding toward the folder, as if I didn't already know the shape of a trap. "It's an offer," Malcolm said. He leaned back against the island and crossed his arms, the posture of casual dominance. "A settlement. You sign tonight, you walk away with 50,000 and the Corolla. No court, no lawyers, no public humiliation." 50,000? I repeated, letting my voice tremble just enough to sell the act. "Malcolm, the house alone." "The house is leveraged," he cut in smoothly. "And frankly, Amani, 50,000 is more than you're worth. You brought nothing into this marriage. You're leaving with nothing. I'm being generous because—" He paused, enjoying the pause. "Because I pity you." There it was, Lorraine's instrument, now in Malcolm's hands. I took a slow step closer. The recorder shifted slightly beneath my blouse, and my skin stung where the tape tugged. "I won't sign it," I said softly. Malcolm's mouth twitched, irritation flashing. "Don't be dramatic." "I'm not," I replied. I know about Riverfront." That name tightened his face, like a man hearing his own footsteps behind him. "You don't know anything," he sneered. "You're a designer. You draw pretty pictures. Leave finance to adults." "I saw the application," I said, voice small, eyes wide. "I saw my signature." His gaze hardened. "And?" "And I didn't sign it," I whispered. "You forged it, didn't you? You put my name on a $200,000 debt." Malcolm laughed. He walked around the island and stopped close enough that I could smell the cologne he used when he wanted to look like a decent man. He poked a finger into my chest, right above the hidden recorder. "I didn't forge it," he said, voice low, intimate, deadly. "I executed it on your behalf because you're too risk-averse to understand how business works." My lungs forgot how to work. "I signed your name," he continued, words sharpening, "because if I asked you, you would have cried and asked questions you don't understand. I did it to protect our future. I did it because you're too stupid to do it yourself." I stood very still. The right shape was frightened, not victorious. "So you admit it," I breathed. "You signed it without my permission?" "I'm the husband," Malcolm spat, stepping back like he'd said something obvious. "I don't need your permission to make us rich." He snatched the folder, flipped it open, and jabbed a pen at the signature line. "Sign," he ordered, "or I'll drag you through court until you can't afford a pack of gum. I'll make sure every judge in this county hears about your little episodes. I'll make you look unstable. You want to play? I'll play." Then he walked out of the kitchen and up the stairs, leaving the air behind him vibrating. I didn't move until I heard the bedroom door close. Only then did I let my hands shake. I stumbled into the pantry, shut the door, and pressed my forehead to the cool wood. My chest hurt where his finger had hit, hurt where the recorder sat like a bruise. I peeled the tape back in small increments. When the recorder finally came free, it left a red square on my skin. I held it like it was a heart. In the bathroom, I locked the door, sat on the tile, and hit rewind. Cheap plastic doesn't care about nerves. I pressed play. Malcolm's voice filled the small room, loud and arrogant, and hearing it without his face attached to it made it worse. "I executed it on your behalf. I signed your name. Because you're too stupid." The words landed again, but this time they didn't hurt. They hardened. I replayed the clip twice, until I was sure the audio was clean. Then I slipped the recorder into a zippered pouch in my purse and hid it beneath a package of gum and a lipstick Lorraine hated. I slept maybe an hour that night. By morning, the skin on my chest was raw. I covered it with a high-neck blouse, the kind Lorraine would approve of, The kind that said wife, not girlfriend. The irony tasted bitter, but it made me smile. At the courthouse, the photographers were already there. Lorraine had done her work. Malcolm stood at the top step, watch gleaming, face rehearsed. When he saw me, his eyes flicked to my neckline, as if he could see through fabric and secrets. He couldn't. Inside the courtroom, the air was colder than it needed to be. Judge Alston sat behind the bench with a tired expression, like he'd seen every variety of love turn into paperwork. Rhett Caldwell was already on his feet, setting his stage. "Your Honor," Rhett began, voice booming with practiced disdain. "This is a straightforward matter. My client has built a business empire through discipline and sacrifice. Mrs. Price has contributed no capital to the marital estate and has refused to work. She has chosen leisure, not labor, and now she seeks to punish Mr. Price for her own dissatisfaction." He waved a stack of receipts like they were evidence of moral failure. Grocery bills, a pharmacy purchase, the throw pillows Lorraine insisted we buy. I kept my hands folded in my lap and stared at the wood grain on the table. Denise had told me not to react. Reaction becomes the story. Across the aisle, Malcolm leaned back, bored. Lorraine sat behind him, head tilted sadly, already warming up her performance. "I've tried so hard with her," she whispered, "but she's fragile." Judge Alston glanced in my direction. "Mrs. Price," he said, "do you have a response?" I stood. My legs felt watery, but my voice came out steady. "Yes, Your Honor," I said, "but I believe the financial records speak louder than I can." Rhett scoffed. "Financial records? We've complied fully with discovery." Denise rose beside me with a calm that felt like ice. She opened her briefcase and rested her hand on a sealed envelope and the small, unremarkable recorder. "Not fully," Denise said, "and not truthfully." Malcolm's gaze sharpened for the first time all morning. Lorraine's pearls glinted as she leaned forward, sensing blood. Denise looked at me once. A silent question. "Ready?" The room felt smaller, as if every bench, every pane of wood, every courthouse seal had leaned in to listen. I could hear the court reporter's keys clicking like teeth. I could smell Lorraine's perfume drifting over the gallery. Powdery, expensive, meant to erase anything human. Malcolm's knee bounced once beneath his table, a quick betrayal of the composure he'd practiced in mirrors. Rhett kept his chin lifted, still convinced this was just theater. Denise's pen tapped once against her pad. Not loud, just a metronome. She leaned close enough that only I could hear her. "Remember," she whispered, "we're not here to prove you were hurt. We're here to prove he chose fraud. Let them keep calling you fragile. Let them keep talking. The more they talk, the cleaner this gets." I swallowed. The recorder in my purse felt like a live wire. Somewhere outside, a camera flash popped in the hallway, and I imagined Lorraine smiling at the sound, thinking it was aimed at me. I didn't nod. I didn't smile. I simply placed my palm on the table, grounding myself in the present. Because in the next moment, the story they'd written for me was about to burn. Denise didn't raise her voice. She didn't pace. She didn't perform. She simply reached into her briefcase and set 3 things on the table with the slow, deliberate care of a surgeon laying out instruments. First, a slim file folder. Second, a sealed envelope with county stamps along the edge. Third, my recorder. Cheap plastic, no bigger than a deck of cards. Ordinary enough to be ignored by anyone who didn't know what it held. Judge Alston leaned forward. "Ms. Carter," he said, impatience sharpening his tone. "What is this?" "This," Denise replied, calm as winter, "is the portion of the marital estate Mr. Price failed to disclose in discovery. And this," she tapped the envelope once, "is evidence of intent." Rhett Caldwell's eyebrows lifted in theatrical disbelief. "Your Honor, this is an ambush. We haven't seen any of this." "You haven't seen it," Denise said, "because your client hid it." Malcolm's smile had disappeared. His jaw tightened as if he were biting down on words. Lorraine sat straighter, pearls rising and falling with her breath. Denise opened the folder, and slid a document across the table toward the bench. Riverfront Renewal LLC, she said. Formed 8 months ago, dissolved last week. And during those 8 months, it received deposits totaling, she glanced down, $1.6 million. None of it was reported. Rhett scoffed. LLCs are common in development. That's not common, Denise cut in, is not the same as legal. Here are the bank transfers. She turned the page. And here's the payout to a private individual, Kayla Monroe. A murmur moved through the courtroom like wind through tall grass. I didn't look at Malcolm. I didn't need to. I could feel the temperature change in his body from across the aisle. Judge Alston's gaze sharpened. Mr. Price, he said. Who is Ms. Monroe? Malcolm stood, smoothing his tie with hands that were just slightly unsteady. Your Honor, he began, voice polished. I believe my wife has misunderstood. My client did not misunderstand a transfer, Denise said. $5,000, repeated monthly, followed by a jewelry purchase in the same amount. She lifted a printed receipt, a Fair Partner jewelry receipt, dated last Friday. Lorraine gasped loudly, a perfectly timed sound. That is private, she snapped, turning her outrage toward me like a weapon. This is a family matter, Your Honor. My son is a respected businessman. This woman is vindictive. Judge Alston's eyes cut to her. Ma'am, he said sharply, you will not speak unless addressed. Lorraine pressed a hand to her chest, pearls trembling. She looked wounded. She looked like a saint being persecuted. Denise didn't blink. She slid another photo forward, concrete split by thick, jagged lines. Developer fraud foundation cracks, she said. This is Riverfront's foundation wall. The original report flagged water table instability. Mr. Price ordered the report altered and paid a city inspector to bury it. Rhett's confidence faltered, just a fraction. Objection, he managed. Speculation. Denise's voice stayed even. Not speculation. We have the original report. We have the revised report. We have email correspondence with the consultant who altered it. And we have... She placed her fingers on the recorder. A statement from Mr. Price himself. Malcolm's eyes snapped to the recorder. Just once, his gaze met mine. It wasn't anger. It wasn't contempt. It was calculation. And for the first time, fear. Judge Alston frowned. Is that a recording? Yes, Your Honor, Denise said. One-party consent. My client recorded a conversation she was part of in her own home. Rhett lunged to his feet. Objection! Illegal wiretap! Georgia is a one-party consent state, Denise answered calmly. My client consented. That is sufficient. Judge Alston's mouth tightened. He nodded once. Play it. Denise pressed a button. The courtroom speakers crackled. Then Malcolm's voice filled the room. Close, intimate, unmistakable. I executed it on your behalf. I signed your name because you're too stupid to do it yourself. Silence slammed down. It wasn't the polite silence of court procedure. It was the kind of silence that happens after a car crash, when everyone is waiting to see who is dead. Malcolm didn't move. Rhett's face drained. Lorraine's mouth fell open, pearls catching on her breath. The recording continued. I'm the husband. I don't need your permission. Judge Alston's face turned a darker shade of red, anger rising from somewhere deep and controlled. He looked at Malcolm as if he'd just transformed from party to a divorce into problem. Mr. Price, the judge said, voice dangerously quiet. Did I just hear you admit to forging your wife's signature on financial documents? Malcolm's mouth opened. No sound came out. Lorraine surged to her feet. He was helping her, she shrieked. She's incompetent. She panics. He had to. Sit down, Judge Alston barked. Now! Lorraine didn't sit. She pointed at me, eyes bright with hate. After everything we gave you. That's enough, the judge cut in, slamming his gavel. The crack echoed like a gunshot. This hearing is suspended. Bailiff, take Mr. Price into custody pending referral to the district attorney for investigation of fraud. Custody. The word didn't feel real until the bailiff stepped forward and Malcolm's hands were pulled behind his back. The cuffs clicked shut. It was the loudest sound I had heard in years. Malcolm turned his head, searching for Lorraine like a child. "Mom!" he said, voice breaking. "Do something!" Lorraine's face crumpled. She clutched her pearls like they could stop gravity. "My heart," she whispered, but her eyes stayed locked on me, promising consequences, even as her world collapsed. Judge Alston's gaze shifted to her. "And you," he said coldly, "if your name appears on any of these entities, I suggest you retain criminal counsel." The bailiff led Malcolm toward the side door. He looked back once, small now, stripped of polish. I didn't flinch. I stood, picked up my purse, and felt the weight of the recorder inside it like proof of my own pulse. Denise touched my elbow. "We didn't just win," she murmured. "We ended it." Outside, the photographers were waiting, flashes popping, hungry for humiliation. Lorraine stumbled into the hallway behind us, already arguing with a man in a suit who wasn't part of the divorce. Law enforcement. I walked past the cameras without lowering my chin. I didn't take a tissue. I didn't count the lenses. I walked through the courthouse doors and into Savannah sunlight with almost nothing. An old car, a thin bank account, a bruised chest. And for the first time in my adult life, I felt rich. If you stayed with me until the end, leave a like and subscribe so you don't miss the next story. Tell me where you're watching from or what time it is for you right now. Drop your thoughts below. What would you have done in my place? And don't forget to tap the screen at the end to watch the next video.